The advice I always give to people who want to be in design is to make a game. These days, tools are as easy to use as they've ever been. Unity and Unreal are both free, and there's a million hours of YouTube on how they work. There's almost nothing stopping you from sitting down, spending 10 hours and making a frankly lousy but functional, complete game, and then make another one. Artists have portfolios and engineers do. I think designers can too these days.
Hello everyone, welcome to another pod recording. I'm over the moon to be welcoming David McDonough onto the pod today. Hi David, how are you?
Hi, good morning. I'm well, thanks.
Not morning over here, mate. We're in London, 3:30. Where in the world are you?
I live in Baltimore, Maryland, so east coast of the US, and it's mid-morning here.
Fantastic. And as is tradition nowadays, how is it over there? Is it cold? Is it snowing, raining?
No, it's starting to look like spring. It's bright sunny. I think it'll be 50 Fahrenheit today. I think I even see little flowers coming out. It's a nice day to be outside.
Days are getting longer, slowly but surely, eh?
Yeah.
So, David, the whole kind of point of this pod really is that I'm always interested in speaking to a variety of people from across the industry, and I'm conscious that there's so many things that happen in our industry that so many people are unaware of. So, the title of this is Behind the Games, and I'd love, if you don't mind, David, first off, to learn a little bit about your journey and how you've come to be in your position now over at OtherSide, and hopefully we can talk a little bit about some of the things along the way, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Just start at the beginning.
Yeah.
Well, I've been in games about 15 years. I started, actually, I got lucky and got hired right out of college. I went to the Savannah College of Art and Design for a couple years and happened to have some friends and contacts at Firaxis, and I stopped by the studio on my way up and down the coast. Purely by accident, ended up applying for an associate producer job there, and I must have liked me a lot because they offered me the job even though I still had a semester to go. So I went back to college, finished, and came back and started in December. And
there's their head office in Baltimore as well, right? So that was local to you?
Yeah, that's where Firaxis is based, and this was many years ago before remote studios were normal. So that's their only studio. They're part of 2K though, so 2K is all over the place. They're headquartered in California. Yeah, but Firaxis has always been a Maryland studio. But yeah, I started there and was a producer for a couple years, and then my enthusiasm had always been for design. I was always interested in going in that route. After a couple of years in the industry, I had the opportunity to move to a different Maryland studio, Big Huge Games, which at that time was making Kingdoms of Amalur: Reckoning, big open world RPG. So they had lots of designers, and I joined their team as a brand new systems designer. And I wasn't there for even half a year. I think it was 4.5 months worked on that game before Firaxis hired me back, but this time as a designer. And I started at Firaxis making their first mobile game, a cute little strategy game called Haunted Hollow. And then I and my longtime teammates and partner made Beyond Earth, Civilization Beyond Earth, a space-based expansion or spin-off to Civilization 5. And from there, a variety of other projects in and out of the Civilization franchise and the XCOM franchise. And I ended up spending 13 years at the studio. And then sort of a couple years into the pandemic, when everybody was reevaluating what they wanted to do and where they were going, and remote work was normal, so changing jobs was as easy as a different email. Yeah. I decided that it was time to move on, try new things. I was ready to keep sort of grow my horizons as a designer after 10 years on the Civ franchise, and I went to Cloud Chamber, which is another 2K studio. You probably heard of it. They're making the next BioShock game. So I thought, from strategy to immersive sims, it's another genre I've always loved. And it's sort of a similar kind of systems-based design thought process. I enjoyed the studio, but it ended up being a bit big and slow moving and kind of maybe too AAA for me. I ended up being too distant from the game and spending too much time in meetings. Plus, at the time with remote work, my family and I were interested in possibly relocating, and it was tough with 2K being a big company and laws in the US around taxes. It's kind of a dumb thing, but sort of normal, unfortunately. So I ended up leaving there after 1 year and coming to where I am now, which is OtherSide Entertainment, which is a little fully remote studio. It was founded by Warren Spector and Paul Newrath of Looking Glass and Thief and Deus Ex fame, to make immersive sims, but to make them innovative ones, to do new things in the genre. And the game that we're working on, Thick as Thieves, is a really like fun and ambitious project. I'm the lead designer. For the first year, it was kind of a wild ride, figuring out what like hammering the game together and building the team. And now I feel like we're in like a nice groove, smooth sailing to build it out, and having just a terrific time here.
That's cool. That's a great journey. And I must say, David, from the people I've spoken to, I think that there's not many that have been able to go straight from education into the gaming industry. And for you, it was even before you finished education, right? That's pretty rare.
Yeah, I've never heard of somebody else who did it that way. I honestly don't know how it happened to me. Like, when people say, "Hey, how'd you get in the industry?" I always say, "Well, you can't do it the way I did. Like, it's just doesn't happen that way." And even at the like it's even rarer now, but at the time, there were hardly any universities or colleges that had any kind of reputation for training game developers. So for you to say, I'm going to go to college and learn the trade of games, and I'm going to go in the industry, that's more normal now. But even still, like going straight from one to the other is difficult. I think I just got supremely lucky and happened to know the right people, or just be in the right place at the right time.
Oh, good on you.
Yeah.
You mentioned, at the time of going to college, you'd always had a passion for design. Had you always had a passion for gaming as well?
Well, definitely as a player. I mean, I grew up playing video games, all kinds, especially strategy. My family was one of those where my parents were against console games, and they didn't let us own a console. So I played on our PC. I like started to rebuild it, like put graphics cards and CD-ROMs in it when I was about 10 or 11, and turned it slowly into a half decent gaming rig all the way through high school, college. But I went to college to actually be an artist, to be an illustrator. And I didn't even think about like trying to be a game developer until I was almost done. And then at the last second, I got a chance to try it. And I thought, hey, this could be a lot of fun, and maybe more fun than illustrating books or comic books. And so I went from my undergrad to Savannah, where I studied it directly, and then managed to go from there straight into business.
Cool. And then, when you were growing up, when you were at college, and even now you're in work, alongside all of those things, have you always been artistic outside in your own spare time? Do you still paint? Do you do anything else kind of in that creative space, like as a hobby?
It's funny. Funnily enough, not so much in the visual arts anymore. Like when I was in college, I specialized in watercolor, and since starting in games, I haven't picked up a brush once. I think I've always had sort of a creative, or kind of a crafty or craftsman bent, and games really scratches that itch for me. Like for instance, when I'm not at work, one of my hobbies is making board games. I have a designed and published strategy war game called Dawn's Early Light: The War of 1812, which is like a niche 3-hour 2-player card-driven strategy game that, people who know card-driven games are like Twilight Struggle, or will be like, oh, I know those kinds of games. There's about 110 players worldwide who love them. But I like to play them, and I wanted the challenge of building one. So I tinker with board game design, card game design. I do a bunch of like DIY things around the house, and otherwise, my hobbies are all like very outdoorsy, and so I think my creative itch is fully scratched by the game zone. These days.
But still, that board game design hobby. I don't know anybody else who's done that. And this is partly why I love doing these podcasts, because I get to find out these things that not many people would have something like that on their LinkedIn, for example. And unless I was able to come and see you for a beer, I'd probably never get to know. And I think that's again really unique, and I love that quirkiness that. So many people in the industry have like these little side projects that are fascinating to people like me that hadn't even thought of anything like that.
Yeah, I think I got lucky there too. I knew a bunch of developers at Firaxis, some of whom had longtime fans of the space and had tinkered with board game design themselves. Being a strategy game studio, Firaxis was full of avid board gamers, the kind of like people who played things like Eldritch Horror and Twilight Imperium, like big, long, complicated games. And there were a handful besides me who were tinkering with their own board games, and I really took inspiration from them that, this is something I could do, something I could try. Did almost the whole thing solo, though I got a lot of help from my colleagues as playtesters. It took a long time, but it was fun to just mess with until one day it was ready. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I had a period where I really enjoyed my board games. And even when I was a teenager, I really enjoyed Risk, the strategy game. I don't know if you played that. I really got into that. And I remember even when I got into kind of late teens, and the times I was starting to drink beer, I remember like with friends, right? You got to dress up as a dictator. It's a fancy dress, come around, play Risk through the night, and really enjoying it when I was entering adulthood as well. That's one that really struck with me. So I love to hear that, man. That's cool.
Yeah, that's great. These days, the kind of board games you can find are so much better than when we were young kids or teenagers. It's really been terrific to see the whole world kind of catch on that board games are fun and diverse and full of interest for all skill levels.
Absolutely. Now, if you don't mind, I'd love to ask you more about your time at Firaxis and working on Civilization. And, I think there's a lot of people in the industry who would love to work at Firaxis. And, I'm wondering, did you manage to get much interaction with Sid Meier? How was that? How was it? Because you were there for what, 13 years over 2 stints. If you don't mind, tell me more about your time there. What was good? What wasn't so good? And
yeah, well, I think Firaxis is one of the most wonderful places I've ever been. It's got a long history. I mean, it was a decade old or more old when I started, but more than that. And when I started, it was small. It was only about 60, 65 people on 2 teams. Like the first XCOM game was still being concepted at that point. It wasn't even released, and people weren't sure if it was going to work. Civilization is a long and venerable franchise with like a really rich history, a very devoted fan base, and it's really kind of a designer's dream to work on that game because it's kind of an endlessly self-reinventing game. And I grew up playing Civs. Like I started with Civ 2 and played all of them. So in many ways, it was like I couldn't have thought of a better job. There were like opportunities along the way over the years to go do other things, and I always passed them by because I thought I can't think of a place I'd rather be than Firaxis. Sid is a really interesting sort of component of that because he is kind of like the grandfather figure of the studio. I mean, he rewrote the original Civ. He co-founded the studio. He's been there forever. He sits kind of apart from day-to-day operations in most cases. Like he has a really unique role where he acts as a mentor to all the design teams, and you can just like walk into his office at any point and sit down and just start talking through design challenges you're having. But he spends most of his time tinkering on his own prototypes, of which there have been dozens that I've seen over the years. That many of which are just thought experiments, or you never know if they're if they have the legs to be a full game. Some of them get further than others. But just by he's constantly just working through his like creative impulses and does not, have to get bogged down in the, production realities of making a full production Civ. He just kind of contributes to it by influencing the mind of the designers and creative leads. And then he influences the whole studio in this kind of guru-ish way where people are always like, well, what's Sid up to today? It's like, he'll just like show up at a company meeting with a new game and everyone will just play it and be like, wow, that's fascinating. And then go on about their regular day. So he's an absolutely lovely man and a pleasure to know, and I sometimes miss the opportunities I've had to talk with him. But the rest of the people of the studio were sort of equally kind of like down to earth, very congenial. Like it had a very familial atmosphere of long veterancy. People know what they're doing. They understand the genre that they're working in the games. It felt like a very like professionally capable and chill place. In all the time I was there, like barely any kind of like drama that the game industry tends to suffer, things like shakeups or product struggles or layoffs or things like Firaxis somehow managed to just like ride past those. I think the strength of the Civ franchise really buoys them and keeps the studio solid, but also keeps its kind of feet on the ground.
Absolutely.
They really rely on it.
And I think also just to kind of jump on that point as well, I think whenever we see people coming out of Firaxis, they're always very highly sought after. They're always excellent professionals, and we don't see many coming out of Firaxis probably for the reasons you mentioned, but when they do, they often get snapped up, and that's no surprise considering what you've just said. And I've just got to say that it must have been an amazing experience being able to lean on Sid like that and just be in his company and throw ideas around. What a fantastic time that must have been.
Yeah, absolutely. It grew a lot over the time I was there. It grew to over 200. I had my ups and downs. I had a couple projects I was on that were canceled. Company took some big swings on games like Marvel's Midnight Suns that were a real effort to develop, and it has had its share of like challenges.
Yeah.
But throughout it all, it has this like identity, this age, and this like just solidity to it that makes it like feel safe, comfortable, and like welcoming and encouraging of the kind of creative collaboration that everyone in games like wants. Like nobody wants to work in an environment where you're like scared for your job or making what the boss tells you to make. Like Firaxis never felt like either of those. It felt like the place where people make games that they genuinely love and they do a good job.
Cool. Yeah. And then onto your current role then, David. You get to work alongside Warren Spector and Paul. Your title, lead designer.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct? Do you mind telling us a little bit more about what your day-to-day role is and some of the jobs you do?
Well, sure. So we're working on like OtherSide makes immersive sims, which if you think of games like Thief, Deus Ex, even things like BioShock and Dishonored, and many that are like it, games that are about like these kind of living world, emergent system, a lot of player agency. You're not told how to do things. You're just told, here's a goal, and now you figure out how you're going to solve it. Which is the kind of games that Warren's always made, and the studio was made to make those games, but specifically to make games that push the envelope of that genre, try to do ambitious things. So that's been the most fun for me. My day to day is these days it's a lot more meetings because the design team has grown in the time that I've been there. Yeah. So I have a lot more to attend to. But when I started, I was first one of a very small number of designers, and then for a period the only designer. And so I was doing all kinds of stuff from writing documentation and specs and collaborating with engineering on their tasks to sitting in on concept art meetings and animation to working in the editor on level design to wiring up user interface code. I was all over the place. I was very busy, and it was exhilarating though tiring. Nowadays, I feel more like a regular team lead where I like guide the efforts of the other designers and sort of spend more time talking to team leadership about the game's vision and direction, so we could do like future planning while the team members who the actual ICs are producing the work on a day-to-day basis. I spend an hour each week talking to Warren about whatever cool stuff in the game design philosophy, his game, which is the company's other project, and that's a treat. In many ways, he's very different from Sid. Where in Sid's case, I would go to him with an idea and we would just chat, but I might not see him for weeks. Warren is almost like the reverse, where like he's calling me up and saying like, I had this thought about your game, let me talk to you about it. And it's really cool to have his involvement. He's been a terrific mentor in the short time that I've been here.
It sounds like you're really enjoying it.
I am, yeah. That's
brilliant.
It's a small studio, but a lot of fun. It reminds me of, in many ways, of like old Firaxis when I started, when everything was kind of small, scrappy, very creative, very sort of energetic. It's a great place.
Cool. Got a couple of questions left for you, David.
Sure.
Firstly, there's hopefully going to be a few people listening to this, and I think some of them are going to be aspiring game designers or people trying to get into the industry. Do you have any advice for any of these candidates that are looking to go down a similar route to yourself that would love to get into design in the gaming industry?
The advice I always give to people who want to be in design is to make a game. I mean, it sounds trite, but these days tools are as easy to use as they've ever been. Unity and Unreal are both free, and there's a million hours of YouTube on how they work. The thing that there's almost nothing stopping you from like sitting down, spending 10 hours and making a frankly lousy but functional, complete game, and then make another one. And like artists have portfolios and engineers do. I think designers can too these days. When I started, the best we could get to was something like a UT 2004 level. That would be the closest that like the average person could make without access to like proprietary tools. And that is completely not the case anymore. So you can make a game. It doesn't have to be published on Steam. It could just be on a website. Show me that you've like thought about the entire game experience. You've done everything from like physics code to user interface to like sound effects. On your own or part of a team. That is the surest way to get the attention of people hiring for design, is to demonstrate your abilities with a complete playable experience, or more than one if you can.
I think that's fantastic advice, and that's so much more powerful than a resume, right?
No, 100%. Like I've seen people with good credentials from good colleges, and I still can't tell. Like, how do they think? Do they have the eye of a designer? Do they have some veterancy from trying an idea, putting it in front of a playtester, seeing it fail, and then coming up with an iteration? But if you hand me a game that you've made, and you say, and I can say, why did you design it this way? And you can tell me the story behind it. 100 times more powerful.
Yeah, I love that. There should be more of it. That's fantastic advice. Thank you, David. And the final question I've got for you, it's just what you're looking forward to getting your hands on this year. Is there anything coming out in 2024 that you're really highly anticipating?
There is. I mentioned I grew up playing PC strategy games, so a long beloved and long in the tooth franchise is the Homeworld series. Homeworld 1 and 2, big space RTS games from the period when RTS was king. A company out of Canada makes these, and I love their work, and I love the Homeworld franchise. And finally, after I think something like 15 years since the previous one, Homeworld 3 is due out this year. In fact, I think it's due out in a couple of months. So I'm highly anticipating that.
I'll have a look at that. Brilliant.
Yeah. It's
one of the best things
game.
about doing this pod is as I'm building up a lovely list of anticipated titles for me to hopefully play. So I'll add that to my list for sure.
Yeah, give it a look. It's one of the Homeworld games are some of the most beautiful games I've ever seen. Like, just gorgeous to look at. Yeah.
David, thank you so much for your time today. You've been an absolute star, giving me some really, really insightful tips and stories as well. I really, really appreciate it. So thank you.
My pleasure.
All the best, David, and hopefully speak to you again soon.
Yeah, take care.
Thanks, mate.